everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. Now, for those of you who have listened to this podcast before, you may have noticed that there's been a change in proceedings. Usually the podcast is hosted by the wonderful Carrie Grant MBE, but today we are turning the tables and we will be the ones interviewing Carrie. So your hosts for today are me, Kristy MacLeod, and my colleague Steve, Commercial Director at Auticon UK.
Thanks, Kristy. Yes, Kristy and I are usually behind the scenes of this podcast, but today Carrie has very generously given us her time to speak about the incredible contribution to the autism community. Plus, Carrie also has some big news that she'll be sharing with us as well.
Yes, we are absolutely thrilled to have Carrie joining us as our guest today. For those of you listening who aren't familiar with Carrie, Carrie is a tour de force in the autism community. Carrie is an incredible advocate and campaigner, mum to 4 neurodivergent children. Plus, she also makes time for an incredibly busy career as a vocal and leadership coach. And she has just released her latest book, A Very Modern Family, which Steve and I have both read and can say is absolutely superb.
I have my copy here as well. Carrie, thank you so much for joining us today. And welcome.
I haven't got a copy, I'm feeling left out.
And welcome to Autism in Conversation with Auticon.
I'm loving this, just looking at you two. It's brilliant. This is good. This is going to be great.
Carrie, we've had the privilege of working with you on 4 series of the podcast now, and your insights have always been invaluable. We're really looking forward to hearing things from the other side of the fence today, and I know you have an announcement to share.
Yes. So what I've loved, I mean, just being involved in the autism world as I have been for probably about 15 or so years now. One of the things I've loved is just an affinity with that community. And I thought that affinity was because of my children and my heart. I have a very empathetic heart. And I've always kind of connected with people that are slightly different, throughout my life, even before I had children. These are the people that I've always felt like are my people. And actually, throughout the last few years, as I've gone through life, there's been so many autistic people who have said to me, Carrie, when are you going to go and get an assessment? And I've maybe we can talk a little bit more about what led to it. But so I had an assessment this year. We're currently in 2023 as we're recording this. And in January of this year, I was diagnosed as autistic. And, I felt like it just came at the right time in my life. I think that for many people, they feel like it didn't come at the right time and they wish they'd known sooner. But I think for me, I have known, I've known for a long while that I've got traits, but I'm one of those people who really believes that you shouldn't say you're autistic unless you've actually got a diagnosis. And if you haven't, I know obviously if you're awaiting a diagnosis, maybe that's slightly different. But I think because we've been so used to people bandying around, oh yeah, I'm a bit autistic, those kind of tropes, you don't really, I've always really respected our people who are actually diagnosed. And so now being actually diagnosed myself, I feel like I'm now an official member of the club.
So what was it that made you decide to pursue a diagnosis? Is there a time that you can remember when it was that you first started to wonder that you might be autistic?
That's such a good question, because I think that everywhere I go at the moment, and I think there are people that are saying the whole time, parents particularly who've got autistic children, I think I might be autistic myself. So I think there's been an upturn in parents saying, well, I think I need to get an assessment. But we all know historically 2 things have held people back. One is the cost. You're hearing about a few years ago, it's like £5,000 to get an assessment some people were paying. And people were waiting 7 years, 8 years, 9 years. So I think for most people, it was totally outside our budgets and outside what's the point in waiting? I'll be dead by the time I get an appointment. And then some other alternatives began to rise up. And one of those alternatives was a company that I chose to go through only because I was running as people may know, for the last 10 years, I've run an autism support group in my home, or David and I have. Actually, our whole family have. And we have hundreds of families that are attached to that. And it was last Christmas, I was talking to one lady, and she was saying, oh, I've just been diagnosed as autistic. And then the guy next to her, a different family, said, oh, I got my diagnosis 3 or 4 months ago. And I said, how did you do this? And they both went to this on the same website and got all these details. So that night, this is the Christmas party. So it's like it's just a week before Christmas. I go online 10 o'clock at night once it's all done, our meeting. And I think, oh, I wonder whether I'll get an appointment in the next couple of years. And the appointment came up for January 2023. So it was within 5 weeks.
Wow.
And yeah, I think it was the right time. I think I've said for a long time, anyone that's heard me speak will know I've said I've got autistic traits. I've known I've got autistic traits for a long while. And that's been how I've couched it, how I've spoken about it. But it felt really important suddenly to own this. I think it's important for me at this point. And I think I remember going to see a trauma therapist many years ago when I was trying to learn more about my adoptive son. 2015 this would have been. And I remember saying to her, I think I might be autistic. And she didn't think I was. But I remember at that time was like the first time I'd ever thought, how do I feel about this? What would I feel if someone said, you know, a doctor said, that's it, you're autistic. And I remember feeling quite negative. And then I was shocked at my own inner brain. Like, why is my brain feeling negative about that word when I teach my children to be so utterly proud of being their fully autistic selves? And I had to, I think, process a little bit. It took me about 6 months, actually, at that time. I never went forward with it, but that was really a 6-month period where I looked at what would that mean for me? How could I own this? What would it mean when you think you're neurotypical, you live with neurotypical privilege. And so in a way, you're giving up that privilege by owning who you are. In one way, you are truly embracing everything that you are, and that's a wonderful thing. But you know that out in the world, I think you then imagine that people will treat you differently, which, you know, may happen. But I think also for many of us that have got to my age, I'm in my late 50s now, you know, we may have fallen out with a few people along the way. I've got friends who've had broken marriages. And I know for them, they're like, I just don't want to be told I'm autistic because then my ex-husband is just going to go, oh, that's what it is. And so I think for some people, there are those troublesome relationships that you've had that you then think someone is now going to use that to gaslight me. So there was a bit of that. And that took 6 months for me to just get through what really matters. And I think by 2016, I was ready to go forward with that, but I just couldn't afford it. And then we got to the end of last year and I heard about this cheaper option and I thought, okay, this feels right. And I always got to the point where I thought, if they tell me I'm not autistic, I'm going to be really peed off. I'm kind of living in it and I'm embodying it now. So yeah, that's why I think, because I kind of knew in my heart, and we've had guests on, you know, the Auticon podcast, many before we've gone live, who said, come on now, Carrie, you need to just do this, you know. So yeah, it's great. And there have also been people that we've had on the podcast who aren't diagnosed, who I have said, I think you really should, you know, maybe think about getting an assessment.
Who's the academic that you talk about? You say about the tap on the shoulder. You've met her. Is it somebody Gold? And you say about the tap at an event where people are like, would you like a chat?
Yeah, I was many years ago, I was at a Tony Attwood conference when my children first got diagnosed, and I was like a groupie. David and I were like groupies. We turned up to every single event that was about autism, not just Tony Attwood, but anyone. We were like, yeah, they're talking about autism. We need to learn. We were hungry to learn. And I can't even remember her name, but she was organising it, this lady. And she said, oh, just looking at you, I've known since Fame Academy. I used to say, that girl up there, she's autistic. And I remember at the time just thinking, what a weird thing to say. I mean, it is a bit of a weird thing to say to someone, but I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for someone to say that to me because it didn't mean anything at that point. That I didn't really know what I was meant to think. Like, does she mean that in a nice way? Does she mean, what does she mean? She's noticed something about me. And I think we second guess what that might be. And especially as autistic people, we probably quadruple question, what did that mean when someone said, I always knew you were autistic? Did they mean that I didn't make eye contact? Or did they mean that I didn't understand what was being said? Did I miss the point? Or yeah, so it's a funny thing, this word autism, rather than saying, oh, I knew you were autistic because you're deeply creative, you think outside the box, you are still like a teenager, even though you're in your 50s. You know, there might be lots of things that are also and deeply empathetic to the point of climbing into the skin of people, kind of empathetic. So, you know, what does that mean? I kind of like the idea that when someone says, are you sure you're not autistic? It might mean something really good. I've noticed you've got these incredible traits. And that tells me that you're not, you know, you're swimming against the tide. You're someone who's a little bit different.
And how did you find the actual diagnostic process?
Yeah, that's such a good question. The lady at the end of it, very much like this podcast is going to be, and unless we have it edited down, it's going to be once she starts talking, she doesn't stop. And in the report, it said, Carrie had a lot to say. And I thought, well, you know, I've paid for my hour. You want to know about, I don't need to know about your life. I'm not assessing you. You're assessing me. It was good. I think we talked about my childhood. And I think there were things back then. I didn't fully understand friendships as a child. I think I was bullied as a child. But I think the other thing that's very confusing, and this comes up a lot with people that I chat to, is that if you've got trauma in your childhood, you know, my dad left when I was 7, and then my mum had a series of boyfriends, and one of whom was incredibly violent. There was all kind of abuse and all kinds of stuff. And because of that, when you go to school as a child, you don't feel like you belong anyway. Especially back then, I was the only child of divorced parents in my class. It would be very different these days, perhaps, but you don't feel like you fit in. You know that it seems in your little, you know, 7-year-old brain that everyone else is going home to really happy families, and you're going home to something where school is the safest place you can be. And so that was my experience. And so school was safe, home was not safe. And so when you say you don't fit in, is that autism or is that trauma? Is that those things that are happening that are abuse at home, or is it that actually you've got a neurodivergent brain? And once I was diagnosed as autistic, I could begin to review and revisit those periods of my life and say, you know, and feel compassion for that child, to get to that point of poignancy with myself, of saying, you know, cut yourself some slack. You actually did really well, you know, particularly I would say in my teenage years, where I think I didn't understand a lot of what was being said to me. I think for women in the arts in the 80s, it was still very difficult. I think there were always guys that would take advantage of you and take advantage of your naivety. But I realized now I wasn't just young and 15, 16 when I came into the arts. It was also about the fact that I wasn't quite understanding what was being said sometimes. And also I didn't understand consent and things like that. So I didn't have any agency and autonomy. And part of that was because of an abusive background. And part of that is, I think, being autistic, which all of those, I love the fact that people that are autistic never stop growing. This is something I see time and time again. We come into fruition. I feel like I came into myself at about 40 and I'm now 58. I think that it's only in the last 18 years that I fully love myself. I like who I am. I'm ready to study and learn more and, you know, do and still expand. And I think, wow, all my neurotypical friends kind of stopped at 18 or 21 and, you know, they're good for life now. And that's great. Or, you know, brilliant. We've had lots of focus on them, but it's nice to focus on the neurodivergent people who perhaps are just coming into their own now in many ways. So, yeah. So people that are late diagnosed, I really want to encourage you. You can, it's now. It's probably now that people are going. That's why they're going for their assessments, because they recognise something. I am really different, and there's something I need to just understand myself a bit more. It's not all negative. Yes, there's grief for your childhood. There's grief for the things that you know could have been different had you known. But there's also lots of potential. There's potential for growth, which I think is great.
This is so interesting. You just sparked another question. So you mentioned this timeline of the last 18 years or so. Is there a correlation there between when those first inklings that you might be autistic started to happen? Is that the same time frame, out of interest?
Yeah, yes, because I had Arlo, my third pregnancy, when I was 40. So yeah, very, very much so. And Arlo was diagnosed within 3 years, age 3, or just before the third birthday. And Tylen, who would have been 7 at the time, was diagnosed on the same day in 2009 in August. So I would have, at that point, I think not maybe so much Arlo, but certainly Tylen, who's very under the radar, is that kind of profile of autism. I do have an affinity with that. And also the amount of empathy that Tylen has. So people would come into our home, they would leave, and Ty would say, that woman's depressed. And I'd be like, Tylen was like 10 years old and saying this stuff. I'm like, how do you know that? And Ty would say, I feel it. And I remember thinking, my gosh, this is like listening to me when I talk about vocal coaching, because when I hear someone sing, the way that my process works as a coach is that I feel uncomfortable if it's not right. And I work with my discomfort. My discomfort is essential to my work. So it's made me feel uncomfortable either because my ears are so sensitive that if it's remotely out of tune, my ears will start telling me they actually hurt. So I didn't realize that's an autistic trait, but yeah, your ears hurting, physically hurting. And working with that discomfort. And I would never then just say to that student, you've made me feel really uncomfortable. That's a terrible performance. I wouldn't say that. But quite often I hear singers who are incredible singers, amazing kind of Whitney Houston type voices. And I'm like, yeah. And inside I'm thinking, yeah, but this isn't moving me. Why doesn't it move me? And then I need to look at technically why it isn't moving me. But it starts with a discomfort. And I really, truly believe that's an autistic gift. That's that empathy. And I see that in Tylen. Tylen feels the room acutely, can tell if someone's uncomfortable. The thing that gets confusing for autistic people, of course, is that if you're in a group of 10 people, you can be picking up all of that. And that's hard to process in the way that it's hard to process some of the other things that we struggle with as autistic people.
I love that. It's so interesting. Actually, just backtracking slightly as well, when you talk, so actually I was going to pull out a bit in your book where you talk about how a diagnosis brings about clarity. And so obviously now you've got your own diagnosis. I just wondered how that feels for, do you feel like you have a new sense of clarity? And also just what the reaction has been like since you've started telling people.
Yeah, it's a funny thing to tell people that you're autistic, because you almost want to say, could you just tell me what you think autistic is and then I'll tell you if I'm it? Because I need to know how you're going to react, and you can't control it. So you just have to say to the people that think you're fabulous, oh, by the way, I'm autistic. And you realize that by just saying that word, their heads are having a kind of audit. Kind of, they're having to suddenly go, hang on a minute, I wasn't expecting that. So, right. So for some people, it will explain me. To some people, for others, it will explain autism. It will help people to go, okay, so autism can look like this too. I have, when I think about it, you said about what other sort of those traits. Also, I care about justice. I care about people that don't get heard. This is a very autistic thing. I sometimes have a late reaction to things. So what I might react to, like in the moment, 5 days later, I'll be in a bit of a head crisis going, something's bothering me. Oh, I know what it was. It was a conversation 5 days ago. And when I talk to autistic people, that's often, not always, obviously, because every autistic person is different, but often that is how autistic people are. Lots of neurotypical people may be the same as well. So we do need to say that. But there are, when you start stacking up all of these things, you go, hang on a minute, I've now got like 10 out of the 15 things that they say autistic, I'm right bang on. And I've always said to Tylen, you and I are exactly the same. I'm just like you and you're just like me. And look how my life's been okay. So when Tylen was little, I used to say this. Just like thinking I was actually putting my affinity with Thailand when really Thailand was really putting their affinity with me.
So, Carrie, as you know, at Auticon, we're all about creating career opportunities and trying to change and create working environments that really enable autistic people to thrive. You've had such a varied career. Could you just give us a little bit of an insight into the things you've done and you know what you've done in your career over the years?
Yeah, and a typically autistic career, to be honest, is so typically autistic. So I don't work well in groups where I'm being managed. That doesn't really work very well for me. I think I need to be my own boss. When I know I'm my own boss and I know that my gifts and skills are being hired because they're good, then I go in as a leader in my own right. And that means when I go into work, I want to be brilliant for my boss, whoever that boss is. So I'm a good worker. So I will serve my boss, but if I was doing that as a permanent job, I might find it difficult. I think I find it good because I go in, I blast, I put all my gifts and skills out there and people go, yeah. And then I walk away and I go, yeah, that was a good day's work. So that's how it's worked for me by and large, is that I work for myself. Remembering also I'm in a partnership with David, my husband, and we have partnered together for we've been together 37 years, so most of it we've worked together. And I think our gifts and skills really complement one another. He is undiagnosed ADHD with a heavy hint of autism himself. And so I think our gifts and skills work really well together. We probably were the couple that were either going to destroy one another or really succeed together. And fortunately, it's been the latter. He's very disorganized, but very laid back. I am incredibly organised, but incredibly intense. So he balances me out. And, for years I was like, oh, it's because you're Jamaican and I'm English and that's why we're like this. It's like, no, Carrie, this is not about culture. This is about your neurodivergence. And so, we're still learning, but we're still learning. Life is such an incredible learning curve. This is, it's incredible. I'm still in my early stages of understanding what it means as well, obviously. But in terms of work, I think about, being a late developer, I think often I will say that to autistic people, don't put pressure on yourself, at 17, 18, like literally, you haven't even been born yet. Come on. You got to be at least 35, or you're going to start seeing some great stuff. And you're going to start to emerge at this age. And that is so exciting. Just when the neurotypicals are thinking, oh, I'm now on the road downwards, the neurodivergents are just found themselves. So that certainly happened for me. Fame Academy happened when I was 36, I think. And that my whole career took off. And the great thing about being neurodivergent is I immediately thought outside the box. It's like, okay, I'm a coach. I want to write a book. Let me see if I can do that. And then they said, yes, I want to make a video. Yeah, then I'm going to make a DVD then. And then it was, I want to do more TV. Yeah, you'll do that then. And then it's like, I like presenting. I'd like to do more of that. Well, I'll do that then. And then, 2 years ago saying, I wanted to go and study and do an MA. Yeah, I'll do that then. So the out of the box way that my brain works is I see that as a huge advantage. I think that the times where it's difficult for me are, as I said, being managed. I don't work well with being managed. I'm also the person in any group of people, and I've annoyed myself throughout the years with this, is that I have 100 questions. Like someone will say, go to the studio, it's in London, and you be there at 10. I want to know all the detail. That's not enough for me. It's never been enough for me. So what am I going to do? Like, what am I doing there? Am I teaching? Am I presenting? What am I actually doing? And then they say, oh, don't worry, it's presenting. We'll let you know the script when we get there. I'm like, no, you won't. You'll let me know now because I need to prepare and my head needs to sit with it. I think I process a lot when I'm asleep as well, which is why I wake up all the way through the night on and off with a new thought, a new bit of imagination going on. So I think needing to know details, it feels like neurotypical they trust everything, don't they? They just like, yeah, I'll just turn up at 10 and see what happens. Not me. I'm like, I need to know. Yeah. I mean, less so if it's something like vocal coaching, I don't need to know all of that because I know what I do and I can do it on the hoof. But I think if it's new experiences, I quite like new experiences. Don't let anyone tell you that autistic people don't like new experiences. I think we do. I mean, I've traveled the world. I have literally gone around this world in all kinds of really incredible places, particularly in the developing world. I've been to incredibly remote parts of Africa, in Sierra Leone, in Uganda. I've been in India. I've been in Nepal. Been to the poorest places where there are no toilets. And I've also got Crohn's disease and autism. And I still have managed to do those trips and absolutely loved them. So I think, I don't know, in some ways, I do think if someone had said, oh, you're autistic before I went on those trips, would I have then been thinking, oh dear, I hope I'm going to be okay? My only concern was I hope, I can find a toilet. And actually, if everyone has to go in the bush, then we're all pretty equal. But yes, so I think, autistic people think fresh out the box. Now I want to write a book. Okay, so I've written the book. What's next? Next corner. What's coming next? I love that. My life has been so varied. And when I think I've written 14 books now over the last few years. And, for some people, they would say, I'm an author. I would never call myself an author because I think I'm a vocal coach and a presenter and a leadership coach and a campaigner. I don't know, so many hats, but I wouldn't call myself an author. But when I think I've written 14 books, then you kind of are. Yeah. So lots of new things and life expands. What's my purpose moving towards my 60s? What will I do in my 60s? There'll be new stuff to be had. That's so exciting. That's an adventure that I want to be on.
So that curiosity, that variety is a real signature of your career. And just to your point then, do you have a plan going forward? Do you look at what you're going to be doing in the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years? Yes and no.
This is a very interesting time to ask me this question. I think I would normally say, again, I think that I don't want to over separate neurotypical and neurodivergent, but I think there are some things that are different. And I think that neurotypical people really think with their brain. For me, picture-wise, I think with my gut. So I feel something. I remember years ago thinking, I really care about some of this autism stuff so much. It bothers me so much that we don't get the help that we need for our children, that I'm going to start campaigning. So it's just an idea. It's like a seed that lands. And then in my head, I just sensed, you're going to be doing this in Parliament. Within 3 months, I'd got an invitation to Parliament. I didn't reach out to anybody. I didn't do anything, but an invitation came. And because it's an invitation amongst a number of invitations that I get each week, but this one I was like, that's the one I must respond to, because I've already had that planted in me that campaigning is going to be something I do. So after that one, I got another one, and then somebody else said, would you like to sit on this? We're doing a green paper. Could you sit on the board for that and work with us on that? And before I knew it, like every waking hour that I wasn't working or parenting was spent campaigning. So I think things get planted in you, and it's learning to trust that inner voice that isn't to do with, oh, you're going to be famous. It's not about that. It's about your purpose. What am I here for? What am I here to do? 100 years from now, the people that will be living in all of our homes won't know who we were. They'll have no sense of us even, probably. So what can I do to make a difference on the little bit of land that I'm in, that I move and shake in? What can I make a difference? Because I really believe that we do make a difference. I fundamentally believe that. So the question in my head is, what's next? What's the next thing that's going to make a transformation? So I went away and I'm studying my MA. That was the next thing. 2 years ago, I just had this sense, yeah, you need to go and study. You left school at 15, you're bright, you need to go back and do some stuff. And I started studying, and it's been hell. It's been really hard, but I've got distinction so far. For all my moaning, for all my I'm useless, I can't do it. Yeah. And I think that's often the case with autistic people, is that we underestimate ourselves. We bitch and moan all the way through and then excel.
It's incredible.
I see this a lot.
we're so lucky that we have had the pleasure of your company and expertise and insight over 4 series now. And it's always a really intense day, isn't it? Because we do the whole lot in a day and we get to spend loads of time together. Yeah. And every time we chat, I come away with so much information about new things that change my perception on things, and new just so much newness. But also I also come away thinking, how do you only have the same 24 hours in a day that everybody else does? Because I think you're a mum of 4, you've got this incredibly varied career, and you're smashing every single thing that you're doing, and it's brilliant. And I love the fact that we've got you being able to talk about this for our podcast now, because, you know, as Steve will agree, and Carrie, I know you'll have heard this a million times, is that the amount of stereotypes that we hear and misconceptions about people who are autistic is, oh no, they have to have, you know, not great at being creative, need lots of routines, not great in the workplace, and all of these things. And hearing about all of your achievements just tears up the rule book. And I love that so much. Do you know what?
I think for many of us, we just need a secure base. And I think if we have a secure base to jump from, then I think I'm very privileged to have a relationship with a partner who believes in me. And from that base, everything else seems possible. You know, not everything succeeds that I do. I do a lot of stuff that doesn't succeed, but I'm quite happy to jump off again and keep trying. And for me, you know, just going back to talking on this, and like you say, having those lovely days together that we have, I cannot think of a better group to do this kind of interview with than you guys, because what you are doing is not just life-changing for autistic people, therefore life-changing for their families, but actually you are system changing. And when you get to system changing, that's when you're talking about legacy, because when auticon is long gone, perhaps who knows, it might expand and become something else. It might just stay as auticon. Who knows what's going to happen? It's already worldwide, isn't it? Pretty much. So but the legacy of that, somebody will stand on your shoulders, won't even know that you were there, but they will take it somewhere else. And this had to happen first. You guys were the real pioneers of really doing this I'm sure there were 1s and 2s, but in a way that really reaches into companies. And we need to see more of this. I just wish that you could, Steve and your team, just multiply yourself 100 times over, so that we could have that in the arts, and we could have it in other areas of, you know, other pursuits. At the moment, you're mostly in tech, aren't you? And it would be great to see that everywhere. And also, I know Steve, when you came and spoke to our group with all our families, we're like, please, could you tell all the schools about this? You know, it's everywhere. Everyone wants this message. And so this is a great place to be having these conversations.
You just touched on the group and your advocacy work and how you got that thought. For anybody who maybe isn't familiar, could you give us a bit of background about the big driving force that came from within your family situation to make because you are such a trailblazer in that respect? Well,
I mean, do you know what? I think that all of us parents are, in a way, we're all trailblazers, because none of us start as trailblazers. I didn't start as a trailblazer. I just started with what I thought were neurotypical children. I took them to school and school didn't work. And then I thought, I know what happens now. You just go into school and you have a decent conversation and then it's all put right. It's only when it didn't get put right and my children suffered to the point of mental health breakdowns that I then went, Helen, no, this can't be. How is this happening in our country, and how do we not know about it? I've since realised there are a number of things like that, but I think so. A trailblazer was born out of, I suppose, becoming that warrior parent. I became the warrior parent when I sat on suicide watch and realised this was so dreadful and nothing was changing. And what could I do? You know, I just teach people to sing. I have no power. What can I do? But I took the little currency that I did have and just said to a friend of mine, can we do a group? There were two things happened at the same time. One was I went to my friend. She was the head of the National Association of Special Educational Needs, Jane. And I said to Jane, could we do something that's about autism and girls? Because I feel like that just is not covered at all. And it really wasn't at the time. And Jane Friswell said, yes, there's a whole group that's meeting for something to do with brain something or other, neuroscience. Let's tag a meeting onto the end of that and we'll talk about girls and autism. So that group, that forum was birthed with the most incredible experts. It was me and Sophie Walker were the only parent people represented. Sophie then went on to do the Women's Equality Party, and I went on just to carry on coaching. But, you know, I started that group, really initiated that. And from that, we wrote a pamphlet, we wrote a book. We then had, what do you call those things? Like meetings and stuff. And it really began to make a difference. We met in Parliament. We went and lobbied. We went and had meetings with MPs. We got people round the table and we told them this is not good enough. And bit by bit, things began to change for girls and those assigned female at birth, that they could get an earlier diagnosis. And actually in that diagnostic process, that in the assessment, it would be leaning not just towards boys. So I believe that group, along with others, really made a big change. At the same time, an incredible woman in my local area said, there are more and more parents who've got girls who are autistic, and there's nothing for these girls. They're all in mainstream schools, so they're not really getting any help. They can't access CAMS because they're not in a big enough crisis. What about if we just started a group? Is there anyone that would be prepared to do that in their house? And I was like, oh, David, no, yeah, we got a nice big lounge. We can do that. But before we knew it, we'd kind of taken the group over, and it just exploded. I mean, because those two things were going on, more girls were getting diagnosed and they had nowhere to go. So the first thing, even the local authorities were saying, oh, you've just got your diagnosis, go and see Carrie and David Grant. I mean, it was ridiculous. We're now part of their local offer. So people come from all over the place, all the surrounding counties, you know, and it isn't so quite so female specific now, but you know, at the time it was absolutely groundbreaking.
And you talk a lot about purpose in your book. I mean, obviously some of the things you've just described are immensely purposeful, but are there some real standout examples over your career or just over the last 10, 20 years that you'd sort of pull out as things you're particularly proud of?
Yeah, proud is, it's funny with the pride thing. It's good to be proud, I think. But I think that my head is always like, go to the place where it hurts. That's always the point of connection. Go to the place where it hurts. What's hurting? Go out into your world and look around and say, what do I care about? What is making me go, wow, that's really wrong. That shouldn't be happening. And so I suppose initially, actually, for me, that started with Crohn's disease, where we had to wait for 6 weeks to see a consultant, and then you'd sit with a consultant, they would speak some kind of gobbledygook that no Crohn's patient, or any patient for that matter, understood. And we realised up in Cambridge that we needed specialist nurses. So we began to lobby for a specialist nurse, and the first specialist nurse was at Addenbrooke's in Cambridge, and that was as a result of me alongside a load of other people. I was the least important, just a patient, but the other patients are not least important. But, you know, I wasn't some, you know, big doctor or professor or anything. And we got our first specialist nurse. And now in every single hospital in the country, there is a specialist nurse for Crohn's and colitis.
Wow.
So I think that was groundbreaking during the 90s. That's before I had any fame or anything. I was involved in that. And I think that gave me a taster for the fact that you can make change, and some of it may be too late for your own children. Like any change that I make to education right now, or I'm involved with, that makes a change, it's not going to change things for my kids, but hopefully it will make it easier for the next generation. I don't want any parent sitting there with a child at home for 3 years because there's no school for within an hour and a half of where you live. And that's what we had with Arlo. I don't want any parent to be sitting there like I was with Tylenol suicide watch 6 times in 3 years in hospital, just going, will my child live to the age of 17? Will they actually make it? I don't want any parent to have to go through that. So not that I can make all the difference, because I can't, but I do believe that together we can. I do believe that actually in parents, there's a huge resource that we don't even tap into. We're so busy gaslighting parents, we don't actually get to use them properly. And also we're so busy being divided by systems, or the people that lead systems, to divide professionals and parents from each other, rather than actually uniting us and giving us a bit of power that we could do some incredible work together. There's lots of stuff that the professionals don't have the time for, but parents do have the time for. And if you made us work together, or helped us to work together, wow, we could make some brilliant collaborations. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen because we're set up in the system to be divided. Overworked professionals and banging on doors and nothing's happening parents. And that means that the minute we do get a door open, we just have a go at the professionals, and the professionals feel, oh, these moaning parents. And those are the tropes that we end up with, unfortunately. But it shouldn't be that way. We can make change if we make friends with each other.
Absolutely. Oh, Steve. That gives me a beautiful segue into the next section of the podcast, actually. So for anyone who's listened to this podcast before will know that we use this final section to get reflective and then look ahead to the positive changes that we want to see in the future. So before we move on to look into the future, I thought it'd be nice just to get a bit reflective with you, Carrie. And so how do you feel as a late diagnosed autistic woman?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think I feel relief. More than anything, probably the overarching thing is relief. I'm also aware that I may not be the same as other people being diagnosed at my age, because maybe they have different settings. And I've probably been thinking about this for a long while, so I've had a bit longer to think. I would say I'm a little bit more understanding of myself, which means that I used to always leave events half an hour early. Sometimes I don't even go to them now. And that means, because I just think I don't actually, I've got a really good reason. I used to just wonder, what is wrong with me? Why can I not get out the house? Why does this feel insurmountable to get to an event that, I'm meant to be at? Not that I let people down. I'm not talking about those kind of things, because I'm very particular about not letting people down. But, there's some things I just have to say, sorry, I can't manage that. I'm not going to be able to do that. And at last, I have a really good reason. I used to feel like I was just being awkward or lazy or not caring enough. Now I'm like, actually, you're autistic. You're too peopled out. It's too peoply here. So it's okay to leave. That's all I can manage. And it also feels like, not that anyone has ever said, oh, you left a bit early. No one's ever said that, but I imagine they're thinking it. And now I'm like, let them imagine, or now they know I'm autistic. They can just go, oh yeah, Carrie needs to leave a bit earlier. Or, I desperately, a lot of the time, want to put my hands over my ears. My ears are so sensitive. And I've always known that. But now I'm like, oh my gosh, I get why my kids put their hands on their ears. It's almost like, now I know I'm autistic, I'm hearing everything even more. So there is that. But I think that will even out. I think this is just, I'm still in those early months of just going, hang on a minute, I've got to rewrite the history. Yeah, with a new context.
I guess sort of leading on from that, one of the things that, there's a couple of things which we'll talk about, but the first one of which, when you talk about failure in your book, and particularly judgment from extended family members, as you know, a big part of our audience is parents of autistic children. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about that in terms of that judgment aspect and how it made you feel?
Yeah, I think it's so hard, isn't it? I just want to almost take a moment for parents out there and just say, look, you're doing great. You really are doing great. And I see you, and we see each other. We can look in each other's eyes and we just know, if you know you've got an autistic child and they're struggling at school and you're dealing with meltdowns and all kinds of expectations that are put on you as a parent and put upon your child, and also divide you as a family, perhaps even with your partner, if you've got a partner, or from your in-laws or your parents, all of that. We get it. We get it because we're living, breathing every single day in that space. So it's that You're seen, you're heard. You may not feel seen or heard, but our community gets it. That's why I love Auticon, because you get it. You know, every guest that's on our show gets it because they're living in it, they're living through it, or they're living with it alongside it. And I think we have to do more to raise awareness. One of the things I've noticed with having our book out, so I guess this is a shameless plug, and I don't need to talk about my book, but I do know that so many parents have said to me, I'm buying this for my in-laws. And we recently were playing a festival and we talked about in-laws and parents not always getting it. Some are brilliant, but a lot don't get it. Or they just think, if you're just a bit stricter, double down, stop being so soft. We've had so many grandparents with tears in their eyes come and, during signings, we've been signing the book and they're like, we really need this book. Thank you for writing it. And you're just like, yeah. I do think sometimes it's a mindset change, isn't it? We need that Greek word metanoia to change the way we think. We need to change the way we think, because when we change the way we think, suddenly the world becomes a different place, and then there's potential for change. And I always hold out for change. I always hold out for the potential for change. People of any age can make extraordinary changes. So I hope that in-laws and parents and siblings and all those people that put those judgments in, bit by bit, we're chipping away, whether that's with a podcast or a book or by knowing someone who's autistic. Bit by bit, we're chipping away at those stereotypes or chipping away at the judgment. And hopefully, we won't need to have these conversations in 20 years because everyone will just get it. Or you'll just meet someone who's autistic and you'll be like, okay, I can see you're a bit neurospicy. You'll pick up on it, right? You'll just be picking up on it, which you do. Our community does, which is why all those people are picking up on me for all these years. The most discerning on neurodivergent people. That's why I was standing in all my children's parties over the years, and you'd have the whole class there, 30 kids, and I'd be going, right, ADHD, PDA a bit there, bit of autism there. I was thinking, why isn't the Senko or the teacher picking up on this? It's so obvious to us. But the parents are great at that. And never underestimate yourself as a parent. You're amazing. I've never met more amazing parents than SEND parents. They are the best. They are the most curious, the most wanting to learn, the most desperate to get change happen, the most dedicated to making it right for their kids. What could be better than that? Give them a round of applause, standing ovation, please.
Absolutely. And at that point about making changes, what I loved, this really appeals to me and my kind of personal outlook in life, Carrie, but almost the sign off to the book was where you actively encourage people to be rule breakers for the good, I might add, but that idea of rule breaking is just phenomenal.
Yeah, every meeting I go into, I'm like, who's the person around the table that's going to break the rules? That's the one I need to, because if you're not prepared to break the rules here, just leave the meeting and I'll meet with one person, because it's only the people that are prepared to say, we don't normally do this. Oh, hang on a minute. But we could. Why don't we normally do this? This is what Auticon's doing. You're going into companies where they would say, oh, we don't normally give someone who's just come out of university their own little corner and their own space. Well, why don't you? Oh, I don't know why we don't. We just don't. Well, how about you change that then? Oh, yeah. How difficult would that be for you? Actually, not that difficult. Right, then do it. And when people do it, you get all the benefits of having that incredible autistic person there and everything they bring, all the pluses. In order to meet and get the best of all those pluses, you have to provide the right environment. And actually, that does bring me to one last sentence on this particular thing, which is when I got my diagnosis, the one sentence that stuck with me was, after I'd finished talking for an entire hour, she said, you have created the environment in which you most thrive. And isn't that what we are all trying to do? We're trying to create environments where people can most thrive. And now it's time for the autistics to get up, stand up, and be given a place where they can thrive, where people will make those changes and adjustments that actually, what does it really cost you? It doesn't cost you a lot. You just got to break a few rules. You got to say that stuff you have this kind of neurotypical thing of, I'm not allowed to do anything different from how we've done it for 500 years. Why not? change it, switch it up, think differently, make a new way of doing things, and you are going to open the door to not just people that need that break, but actually that benefits you. Those people are going to work so hard, and they are skilled in ways that you can't even imagine. So, it's a win-win, isn't it? If we start breaking the rules, then everyone gets to play.
Absolutely. And we love you for that wisdom. It's just so great to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely
Thanks for having me.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you, Carrie. We've just got one final question, actually. So look into the future. If none of us have got crystal balls, but in 10 years, what would you like to see happen for the autism community?
I would like to see the concept of normal challenged more, because I think once we start challenging what we call normal, then it helps the neurodivergent people, including autistic people, to come into the space in the centre. I'm tired of autistic people and neurodivergent people just being on the edges. They should be able to take their place in the centre. I joke now about, can you imagine, 20 years from now, a neurotypical person will be on a waiting list waiting for their assessment of neurotypicalness. You're going to get a diagnosis of being neurotypical because the neurodivergent people have stepped into the centre and now they are in the majority. No, but just a space where everyone, whoever you are, whatever your brain type, is not just accepted, not just tolerated, which is the worst thing. I don't want to be tolerated, but actually actively celebrated, actively seen as valuable, actively seen as having assets. That to me, and I believe there are assets in our autistic children and adults that have never been seen because they've never been given the environment where they can thrive. All that I've had is an environment where I've been able to thrive. If you didn't give me that environment, I'd be just the same as everybody else. I'd be struggling the same. I'm only not struggling because I've found a space where it seems to work for me, and then my gifts, wow, they all come out, and that, I want that for every autistic person. That should be there for every person, quite frankly. Create the environments where we thrive.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Carrie, thank you so much for joining us today. It's
Thank
just
you.
always such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Carrie. We will see you for season 5 of Autism in Conversation with Auticon.